The rain came down like the sky itself had cracked open. Lightning flashed across the dark evening as thunder roared over the quiet street, shaking windows and rattling loose signs. Most people had already rushed inside their homes, hiding from the violent storm. Cars passed quickly, tires slicing through puddles, their headlights briefly illuminating the empty sidewalk before disappearing into the curtain of rain. But in the middle of that storm, someone was standing outside. Daniel Carter noticed them the moment he turned his truck onto Maple Street. At first, he thought it was just a pile of bags abandoned near the curb. But when lightning struck again, the bright flash revealed the truth. A woman and a child. They were standing beside two soaked suitcases, their clothes drenched, their bodies shivering as the storm poured down on them mercilessly. But what froze Daniel's heart was the sight behind them. The apartment building door had just slammed shut. Someone had thrown them out. Before we continue this emotional story, take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to the channel if you believe the world still needs second chances and compassionate people. Daniel slowed his truck, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. For a moment he thought about driving past, not because he didn't care, but because life had already taught him how complicated helping strangers could become. Daniel was a single father. 3 years earlier, he had buried his wife after a sudden illness stole her away from him and their little daughter, Lily. Since then, every day had been a quiet battle, working long hours at the local auto repair shop, rushing home to cook dinner, helping Lily with homework, trying to fill both the role of mother and father in a world that suddenly felt colder. Life had forced Daniel to be careful. But as lightning flashed again, he saw the little child clinging tightly to the woman's arm. The boy couldn't have been older than 5, he was crying. And suddenly Daniel remembered another rainy night years ago. The night he had driven his sick wife to the hospital while Lily cried in the back seat. Helplessness had a very familiar look. Without realizing it, Daniel's foot moved to the brake. His truck rolled to a stop. Rain hammered against the windshield as he stared through the glass, his mind wrestling between caution and compassion. Then he sighed, because some choices aren't really choices at all. Daniel grabbed his jacket, pulled the hood over his head, and stepped out into the storm. The rain instantly soaked him as he walked toward them. Up close, the situation looked even worse. The woman's hair was plastered against her face, her arms wrapped tightly around the trembling boy. Her eyes were red, not just from the rain but from crying. The suitcases beside her looked old and overstuffed, like everything they owned had been crammed into them. When she noticed Daniel approaching, fear flashed across her face. Her body instinctively pulled the boy closer. Daniel quickly raised his hand slightly, trying to appear non-threatening. The storm roared around them as he stood there for a moment, unsure how to begin. Then he gently pointed toward his truck parked by the curb. A warm glow spilled from its interior light. The woman hesitated. You could see the battle inside her mind, trust versus survival. Strangers had probably failed her before. Daniel understood that. Life had failed him before too. But finally the boy tugged lightly on her sleeve, shivering harder as the cold wind whipped through the street. Something in that moment broke her hesitation. She nodded slowly. Daniel quickly grabbed their suitcases and loaded them into the back of his truck while the woman carried the boy inside the warm cab. The heater blasted warm air as they sat silently for a moment. The boy's tiny hands were still shaking. Daniel handed him a small blanket from the back seat, Lily's old travel blanket he always kept in the truck. The boy wrapped himself in it immediately. As Daniel drove away from the apartment building, he noticed something in the rearview mirror. The building manager was standing at the door watching them leave with an expression that looked more annoyed than concerned. Daniel's jaw tightened. Some people forgot what humanity meant. The storm followed them across town as Daniel drove toward his small house. His mind raced with practical concerns. Was this dangerous? Was he making a mistake? He barely knew these people. But another thought pushed those worries aside. What if no one helped them tonight? His house wasn't big, just a small 2-bedroom place with a creaky wooden porch and a tiny backyard where Lily loved chasing butterflies during the summer. But it was warm and safe. And sometimes that was enough. When they arrived, Lily was already waiting by the window. She always watched for her father's truck after school. The moment Daniel opened the door, Lily ran toward him. then suddenly stopped when she noticed the stranger standing behind him. Her curious eyes widened. Daniel knelt beside her and gently explained that their guests needed a place to stay because of the storm. Lily looked at the little boy wrapped in the blanket. Then she smiled. Children often understood kindness faster than adults. She ran to her room and returned with one of her stuffed animals, a small worn teddy bear. She placed it into the boy's hands without hesitation. The boy stared at it like someone had just given him treasure, and for the first time that night, he smiled. The storm raged outside for hours. Inside the small house, something entirely different was happening. Warm soup simmered on the stove. Wet clothes were replaced with dry ones. The woman finally introduced herself as Maria. Her voice carried exhaustion, but also dignity. Life had not been easy for her. Her husband had abandoned them 2 years earlier, leaving her to raise their son, Matteo, alone. She had been working 2 jobs just to keep their small apartment. But when the restaurant she worked at closed unexpectedly, everything collapsed quickly. Rent piled up, bills grew, and eventually, the landlord stopped waiting. Tonight had been the final notice, thrown out into the storm. Daniel listened quietly, because in her story he heard echoes of his own struggles. That night, after the children fell asleep on the living room couch surrounded by blankets and stuffed animals, Daniel sat alone in the kitchen. Rain tapped against the window. He stared at the 2 small figures sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. A strange thought slowly formed in his mind. A risky one. But sometimes the most life-changing decisions begin as quiet thoughts in the middle of the night. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the windows as birds returned to the trees outside. For the first time in days, Maria looked hopeful. Daniel handed her a cup of coffee. Then he made a decision that shocked even himself. At the auto repair shop where he worked, the owner had been searching for someone to help manage the front desk and handle scheduling. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable work. Daniel had always ignored the job opening, but now, things felt different. He offered to recommend Maria, not just that. Until she got back on her feet, they could stay in the spare room. The silence that followed felt heavy with emotion. Maria covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes again, but these ones were different. They were tears of relief. Weeks turned into months. Maria worked hard at the shop, quickly proving herself reliable and capable. Customers liked her kindness and patience. The business actually started growing because of her organization. Matteo and Lily became inseparable. They built pillow forts in the living room, shared snacks after school, laughed louder than the house had heard in years, and Daniel slowly realized something he hadn't felt since losing his wife. The house no longer felt empty. It felt alive again. The night of the storm became a story they often remembered, the moment everything changed. But before we reach the ending of this story, we have a small request. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes kindness can change lives, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this. And here's a special request. Comment the word kindness below if you believe one small act of compassion can transform someone's life forever, because what happened next proved exactly that. 1 year later, Daniel stood in the backyard watching the children play under the warm sunlight. Matteo was chasing Lily with a water balloon while Maria laughed nearby, planting flowers along the fence. The house that once felt quiet now echoed with laughter every day. Daniel realized something powerful in that moment. The night he stopped his truck during that terrible storm, he thought he was saving 2 strangers, but in truth, they had saved him too. Loneliness had slowly been replaced with family, grief had softened into hope, and the empty spaces in his life were now filled with warmth he never expected to find again. Sometimes the most shocking decisions are the ones that come from the heart. A single moment of kindness, a truck stopping in the rain, a door opening when someone has nowhere else to go, and that small choice can change the course of multiple lives forever. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or reminded you that kindness still exists in the world, please like this video, comment your thoughts below, and share it with someone who believes humanity still has hope. Because somewhere out there tonight, someone might be standing in the rain, waiting for a stranger brave enough to stop.